Agnosticism and theism represent two of the most fundamental and influential positions in the vast field of philosophy of religion and theology. While theism affirms the existence of a deity or deities, agnosticism addresses the question of the knowability of the divine, declaring it inaccessible to human knowledge. The interaction and contrast between these perspectives has shaped centuries of philosophical and theological thought, influencing debates about the nature of reality, the limits of human knowledge, and the purpose of existence. Agnosticism is a philosophical doctrine that focuses on the limitations of human knowledge, particularly regarding the existence of God or metaphysical and supernatural realities. Thesis, not a denial of divine existence, but rather the assertion that the veracity of such claims is unknown or unknowable. Definition and etymology. The term agnostic was coined in 1869 by the English biologist Thomas Henry Huxley. The word derives from Greek agnostos, where the prefix denotes negation or privation, and nostos means knowledge or knowable. Thus, etymologically, agnosticism means non-knowledge or one who does not know. The essence of agnosticism, therefore, lies in the position that human reason is incapable of providing sufficient rational grounds to justify either the assertion of the existence of a deity or its non-existence. It is essential to distinguish agnosticism from mere indecision or lack of positioning on beliefs. It represents a philosophical stance on the knowability of the absolute. Historical context and key thinkers. Although the term agnosticism is relatively recent, the ideas underlying agnosticism have deep roots in the history of thought. Thinkers before Huxley already promoted agnostic views. Protagoras, a Greek philosopher of the 5th century BC, is often cited as a precursor with his doubts about the gods. The creation hymn Nasadiya Sukta in the Rig Veda, an ancient Sanskrit text, also reflects an agnostic attitude about the origin of the universe. In the context of modern philosophy, figures such as David Hume, Immanuel Kant, John Stuart Mill, and Herbert Spencer are considered agnostic epistemologists. Kant's theory of the unknowability of the thing in itself and the impossibility of demonstrating the existence of God is a clear example of an agnostic perspective in metaphysics. The morate positivism of Auguste Comte and Herbert Spencer is also characterized by its agnostic stance, reducing science to knowledge of the phenomenal and relative, declaring the absolute inaccessible to human understanding. This video explores the nuances within agnosticism, a philosophical stance concerning the knowledge of God or the supernatural. It delves into various types of agnosticism, including theistic, atheistic, weak, strong, apathetic, modal, and agnostic agnosticism, highlighting their distinct perspective on the possibility and relevance of divine existence. Theism is a belief system based on the assertion of the existence of a deity or deities. It is one of the oldest and most widespread positions in human history, serving as the foundations for countless religions and philosophies. Definition and etymology. The term theism was introduced by Ralph Cudworth in the 17th century and derives from the Greek word theos, which means God. Generally, a theist is a person who believes in at least one God or deity. This belief stands in direct contrast to atheism, denial of the existence of any God, and agnosticism, uncertainty about the existence of God or gods. Deity in theism is often conceived of as a supernatural, holy, divine, or sacred being who can assume human form, be immortal, and possess attributes such as omniscience, omnipotence, and omnipresence. Theistic agnosticism represents a unique position where an individual believes in the possibility of one or more deities but acknowledge a lack of concrete knowledge or proof of their existence. They perceive the deity as something unknown or unknowable, yet refrain from dismissing the possibility of its existence. This perspective often stems from a sense of humanity regarding the limits of human understanding and a recognition that empirical evidence for or against the existence of God may be inherently unattainable. Theistic agnosticism may engage in spiritual practices or hold religious beliefs while maintaining a degree of skepticism about definitive claims of divine knowledge. Atheistic agnosticism, conversely, involves a lack of belief in the existence of any divinity while simultaneously acknowledging the uncertainty surrounding the question of God's existence. Individuals holding this view do not assert that God does not exist, but rather admit that do not know whether God exists or not, recognizing the inherent unknowability of supernatural phenomena. This position is grounded in the absence of compelling evidence for God's existence and commitment to intellectual honesty. Atheistic agnostic may be open to the possibility or future evidence that could alter their stance, but currently find no sufficient reason to believe in God. Weak, empirical, open agnosticism. Weak agnosticism, also known as empirical or open agnosticism, asserts that knowledge of the divine isn't currently possible, but does not rule out the possibility of future evidence or proof. This perspective maintains an open mind, remaining receptive to denial or belief based on logical and rational evidence. Weak agnosticism acknowledges the limitations of current human understanding and the lack of definitive answers to questions about God's existence, but remain hopeful that future discoveries or insights may shed light on the matter. They are willing to consider new evidence and arguments, adjusting their beliefs accordingly. Strong agnosticism, also referred to as convinced or absolute agnosticism, holds that it is fundamentally impossible for human beings to know or prove the existence or non-existence of God or the supernatural. This view posits that the discussion is futile since neither science, logic, nor reason can definitively prove or disprove such existence. Strong agnostic believes that the nature of God, if it exists, is inherently beyond human comprehension, and that any attempt to understand or prove its existence is ultimately doomed to failure. They may argue that the limitations of human perception and cognition preclude any possibility of gaining reliable knowledge about the divine. Apathetic agnosticism is characterized by indifference towards the question of God's existence. Individuals holding this view consider the existence or non-existence of a deity irrelevant and believe that it has no significant impact on human life or the universe. Apathetic agnostics may argue that focusing on practical matters and human concerns is more productive than engaging in debates about the existence of God. They may also believe that the question of God's existence is ultimately unanswerable and therefore not worth pursuing. Modal agnosticism presents a unique approach, suggesting that while science, metaphysics, or philosophy may not be able to definitively define the existence of God, reason can be employed to explain divine existence. This perspective seeks to bridge the gap between traditional agnostic viewpoints and the possibility of rational inquiry into the nature of God. Modal agnostic may propose models or framework that attempt to reconcile the concept of God with logical principle and empirical observations. Agnosticism argues that the question of God's existence cannot be meaningfully debated until a clear and coherent definition of God is established. Agnostics believe that the concept of God is too ambiguous to be discussed productively, and that any attempt to address the question of God's existence without a precise definition is inherently flawed. They may argue that term God is used in so many different ways that it lacks a consistent meaning, making it impossible to determine whether it refers to a new thing real. Agnosticism often involves a critique of theistic language and a call for greater clarity and precision in discussion about religion and spirituality. Greek philosophers such as Plato and Aristotle already discussed the notion of cosmic order and purpose, laying the foundation for theistic arguments. In the Middle Ages, thinkers such as Thomas Aquinas formulated cosmological arguments for the existence of God, known as the Five Ways. In the 18th century, William Paley popularized the theological Deising argument with his famous clock analogy. Deism, a particular form of theism, flourished during the Enlightenment, with advocates such as Voltaire, John Locke, Thomas Paine, Edward Herbert, and Immanuel Kant. Kant, in his Critique of Pure Reason, distinguished the deist, who believes in a supreme being as the root of things, from the theist, who believes in a living God, creator through intelligence and freedom. David Hume, although skeptical of anthropomorphic divine attributes and particular providence, is often characterized as a deist, admitting the existence of a supreme creator being who established natural laws, but without ongoing supernatural intervention. In the contemporary philosophy of religion, Richard Swinburne is a proponent of theistic evidentialism, defending the coherence of theism through rational arguments and evidence. Alvin Plantings, in turn, developed reformed epistemology, suggesting that belief in God can be adequately basic, not needing argumentative proof, and introducing the concept of sense of divinity. Paul Moser, with his Epistemology of Volitions, argues that divine evidence manifests itself through moral and spiritual transformation, not just intellectual inquiry. The impact of agnosticism on theology and philosophy. Agnosticism, by questioning the knowability of the divine, exerts a profound and multifaceted impact on both theology and philosophy, redefining the terms of debate over faith and reason. In theology and religious doctrines, agnosticism directly challenges traditional theology's claims to know and define God, as well as to establish doctrines based on revelation or empirical evidence. The very essence agnosticism, which asserts the inaccessibility of knowledge about the transcendent, forces theology to reevaluate its epistemological foundations. Review of divine attributes and revelation. Theistic agnosticism, for example, by admitting belief in a deity but considering it unknown or unknowable, influences the logical discussions about God's attributes. If God's nature is fundamentally unknowable, then elaborate doctrines about His omniscience, omnipotence, and perfect goodness become objects of question, leading to a more apophatic, negative theology, which describe God by what He is not, rather than by what He is. The validity of divine revelation, central to many religious doctrines, is called into question, because if God's knowledge is inaccessible, the very idea of direct and comprehensible divine communication becomes problematic. Challenge to divine existence and the relevance of faith. Atheistic agnosticism, by tending towards the non-existence of deities while maintaining the stance of unknowability, challenges theological claims of the divine existence and the necessity of faith based on such claims. Even apathetic agnosticism, which considers divine existence irrelevant to human life, questions the practical importance and urgency of religious doctrines, potentially leading to a decline in adherence to theism in some parts of the world. Impact on theological discourse. Agnosticism, by demanding a clear definition of God before any discussion of His existence, significantly impacts theological discourse. It forces theologians to be more precise in their basis of their claims. The fragmentation of classical reason into multiple rationalities, as pointed out by Mario Miranda S.J., also conditions human access to the transcendent, reinforcing the need for greater unity between faith and reason in contemporary theology. In philosophy, epistemology and metaphysics. In philosophy, agnosticism manifests itself as a form of skepticism, particularly in epistemology and metaphysics, by questioning the human capacity to reach absolute truths or to know beyond sensory experience. Limits of knowledge and epistemological skepticism. Agnostic epistemology denies the possibility of knowing facts as they really are, or even whether facts exist outside the knower. This stance is a version of radical skepticism, which argues that the hypothesis of the supernatural can neither be proven nor disproved empirically because it is inaccessible to senses. Philosophers such as Hume and Kant, when exploring the limits of reason and the unknowability of the thing in itself, exemplify this agnostic strand. Strong agnosticism, in particular, holds that any truth about the divine is unknowable, challenging the very foundation of any claim to religious knowledge. Metaphysical implications and the renunciation of speculation. Metaphysically, agnosticism declares the absolute, such as the origins of life or the ultimate nature of reality, inaccessible to the human spirit, considering any metaphysics that cannot be empirically proven to be vain. This leads to a philosophical attitude that, in principle, resignation to metaphysical speculations because he considered them futile. Science, from this perspective, is reduced to the pledge of the phenomenal and the relative. Thinkers such as Bergson and Emil Lask, Altoug with distinct nuances, explored the heterogeneity between reality and reason, and the limits of logic in understanding the irrational inherent in the content of reality, reinforcing the idea of reality inaccessible to human knowledge. In theology and theological systems. Theism is the backbone of countless religios, providing the basis for understanding the universe, morality, and the purpose of life. Foundation of doctrines and belief systems. Monotheistic theism, in particular, as seen in Christianity, Islam, and Judaism, establishes a single God as the creator and sustainer of the universe, responsible for the governance and organization of the world. This unified conception of God provides a coherent framework for theology, allowing for the divine nature. Theism offers a sense of purpose and meaning to life, connecting human actions to a divine plan and providing a foundation for ethical and moral systems that promote values such as love, compassion, and justice. Evolution of theological perspective. Theism is not static. It adapts and evolves, giving rise to new theological perspective. Open theism, or open process theology, is a notable example, challenging traditional theism by proposing a relational God who does not possess absolute knowledge of the future, especially of free human choices. This approach seeks to reconcile belief in a loving God with the reality of free will and responds to the choices of creatures, rather than determining everything in advance. This has significant implications for the doctrine of divine omniscience and the understanding of providence. Theism has been a fertile field for philosophical investigation, especially in metaphysics, when postulating the existence of a supreme being, and in epistemology, when seeking to justify belief in such a being. Philosophical arguments for the existence of God. Philosophy of religion in a field where theism is rigorously defended and debated through rational arguments. Cosmological arguments. It postulates that the universe requires a first cause, identified as God. Philosophers such Plato and Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas contributed to this line of reasoning. Theological arguments. From Deising, argues that the complexity and order of the natural world imply an intelligent designer. William Paley and Michael B. are notable proponents. Moral arguments. It suggests that the existence of objective and universal moral values points to a divine moral lawgiver, as Immanuel Kant and other contemporary scholars have explored. Ontological arguments. It seeks to demonstrate the existence of God based on the concept of a perfect and necessary being, formulated by Anselm of Canterbury and René Descartes. Central metaphysical and epistemological question. Theism raises complex questions about the nature of God and the possibility of knowing Him. Consistency of divine attributes. Theistic philosophy faces the challenge of demonstrating the logical coherence of divine attributes such as omnipotence, omniscience, omnipresence, eternity, and moral perfection. Problems such as the stone paradox, a question about omnipotence, illustrate the difficulties in reconciling these attributes without contradictions. The discussion about the eternity of God, whether He exists in temporality or outside of it, is also a central metaphysical question. Divine omniscience and human free will. One of the most persistent dilemmas is the compatibility between God's omniscience, His knowledge of all future events, and human freedom. If God already knows the future, human actions are predetermined, which seems to nullify free will. Various solutions, including compatibilism distinction regarding the types of divine knowledge, Ochimism, monism, are proposed to reconcile these concepts be understood as the knowledge of all that is possible not including free future actions that do not yet have a truth value. The problem of evil. This is perhaps the greatest philosophical challenge to theism, questioning how an omnipotent and perfectly good God can coexist with the existence of evil and suffering in the world. Theodicies, explanations for the coexistence of God and evil, and skeptical theism, which limits human understanding of divine purpose, are theistic responses to this problem. Plantinga, with his defense of free will, argues that God could not create a world with moral good without the possibility of moral evil, for that would require the coercion of free will. Epistemology of religious belief. Philosophy of religion also investigates the epistemic status of religious beliefs. Evidentialism, championed by Richard Swinburne, holds that a belief is justified only if there is supporting evidence, and that the degree of confidence should be proportional to that evidence. In contrast, Alvin Plantinga's Reformed epistemology proposes that arguments, but being a fundamental belief, analogous to belief in an external world. Plantinga introduces the concepts of sense of divinity, an innate cognitive faculty that allows humans to know God. Paul Moser, for his part, argues that the evidence of God becomes apparent through an oral and spiritual transformation, an epistemology of volitions. Although often presented as opposing positions, agnosticism and theism maintain a complex relationship marked by conceptual intersections and an ongoing dialogue that enriches both theology and philosophy. The existence of the theistic agnosticism, one of the clearest demonstration of an intersection between the two positions. A theistic agnostic is someone who, while admitting to having no knowledge or proof of the existence of God, still believes in the possibility of one or more deities. This position reveals that agnosticism is not inherently a denial of belief, but rather a stance on recognizability of the object of belief. For an agnostic Christian, for example, faith can be maintained even while admitting the inability to prove the reality of God. This challenges the simplistic notion that theism and agnosticism are mutually exclusive, showing that epistemological debate can coexist with adherence to a belief. The dialogue between reason and faith. The tension between reason and faith is a central theme connecting agnosticism and theism. Agnosticism, by emphasizing the limits of human reason and penetrating the realm of the supernatural, forces theism to confront the rational basis of its own claims. On the other hand, theism, through its philosophical and theological arguments, seeks to expand the horizons of reason in penetrating the realm of the supernatural, forces theism to confront the rational basis of its own claims. On the hand, theism, through its philosophical and theological arguments, seeks to expand the horizons of reason or propose other paths of knowledge, such as faith or transformative experiential, beyond what is empirically variable. The skeptical critique and the theistic response. Skepticism, of which agnosticism is a branch, criticizes reason's ability to prove existence of God, leading to a suspension of judgment. This criticism drives theistic to refine their arguments as the reconciliation of omniscience with free will. The philosophy of logic, epistemology, and metaphysics are employed to analyze the justification of religious beliefs, paths of access to the divine, while agnosticism points to the inaccessibility of the absolute through the senses and empirical reason. Theism proposes different paths of access to God. Plantinga Reformed epistemology, with the sense of divinity, suggests an innate cognitive faculty for the perception of God. Paul Moser, with his epistemology of volitions, argues that knowledge of God can be conditional on the moral and spiritual transformation of the individual. These approaches seek to respond to the agnostic challenge by proposing that knowledge of the divine may be attainable through traditional means of science or formal logic, but through other of human engagement. Philosophy of religion is the academic field where the dialogue between agnosticism and theism is most explicitly articulated. The discipline is dedicated to the study of the spiritual dimension of humankind from a philosophical perspective, investigating the essence of religious phenomena and debating the existence of God. Argument analysis. Philosophy of religion critically analyzes both arguments for cosmological, theological, moral ontological, and arguments against the existence of God, such as the problem of evil and the inconsistency of divine attributes. The presence of agnosticism in this debate ensures that theistic claims are subjected to rigorous scrutiny, questioning not only the validity of the arguments, but also the very possibility of knowledge about the divine. Synthesis and future perspective. Agnosticism and theism, though distinct in their fundamental approaches to the existence and knowability of the divine, are intrinsically interconnected concepts that continue to shape the intellectual landscape of theology and philosophy. Theism, with its affirmation of the existence of a deity or deities and its various forms, monotheism, polytheism, deism, etc., offers a framework for belief systems that provide purpose, meaning, and ethical foundations. Its rich history is marked by the development of rational arguments and the evolution of theological perspective, such as open theism, which seek to harmonize the divine nature with human experience. On the other hand, Agnosticism, defined by the unknowability of the absolute and the supernatural, acts as an essential critical counterpoint. It challenges the claims of absolute knowledge in theology and metaphysics, pushing philosophy to explore the limits of human reason and the nature of skepticism. The various strands of agnosticism, from theistic to strong, illustrate the complexity of this position, which is not a mere absence of belief, but a rigorous epistemological stance. The interaction between these worldviews is particularly evident in the philosophy of religion, where debates about the consistency of divine attributes, the problem of evil, and the conditions for justifying religious belief are constantly reevaluated. Agnosticism forces theism to self-criticize and deepen its rational and experiential foundations, while theism, in turn, offers agnostic reflection, the complexity of human aspirations toward the transcendent, and the rich traditions of thought that seek to understand it. In an increasingly pluralistic and secularized world, understanding these positions becomes even more crucial. Agnosticism reflects an intellectual honesty about the limits of knowledge, while theism continues to offer framework of meaning for billions of people. The ongoing dialogue between these perspectives not only enriches academic thought, but also contributes to a more nuanced understanding of the human condition in relation to the mystery of existence. Future discussion will likely, evil, and the conditions for justifying religious belief are constantly reevaluated. Agnosticism forces theism to self-criticize and deepen its rationale experiential foundations, while theism, in turn, offers agnostic reflection, the complexity of human aspirations toward the transcendent, and the rich traditions of the thought that seek to understand it. In an increasingly pluralistic and secularized world, understanding these of the human condition to explore new ways of reconciling reason and faith, the limits of knowledge and the human search for meaning in a complex and the limits deeply mysterious universe.